A friend of mine was reading Schopenhauer 30 years ago, and one of the things is, it is bad today, will be worse tomorrow, and so on until the worst of all, or something like that, which is great. Or at the party, you think that you were among a noble company, but in fact, the real attendees of the party are compulsion, pain, and boredom, or something like that. It's just, it's like if you hate everything and you're 19, it's just like, it's perfect.
I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you are listening to Slee Rickets. A quick note for any of you who live in the Triangle area, I'm going to be at Flyleaf Books this Thursday, tomorrow, I guess, according to if this is released on Wednesday, it should be tomorrow. I'm going to be interviewing Alan Shapiro, who's got a new book out called Proceed to Check Out. So there's a signing at 5:30, and then the talk starts at 6 p.m., he's going to read some poems. I'm going to interview him. I'm not totally sure what we're going to talk about. I have some ideas, but I always enjoy talking to Alan, and it was my conversations with him and Jonathan Farmer that largely inspired this podcast. So if you like this, then you will, I imagine, like that. So come to Flyleaf Books if you are in the area, 6 p.m. Thursday, April 14th, probably tomorrow if you're listening to it the day it comes out. If you listen to it later in the week, then you fucked up and already missed it. But I hope to see some of you there, and I hope I have some smart questions to ask. I'm really very underprepared for this. My guest this week is Joshua Mehigan. I never, in the 4 hours we talked, actually remembered to ask him how to pronounce his last name. I never remember to ask any of my guests how to pronounce their last names, except for James Nguyen, apparently. But I think it's Joshua Mehigan or Mehigan. He is, in any event, one of my very favorite living poets. I have admired his work for a long time, long before I had any correspondence with him. And I really only got to know him through this podcast. But he is a truly brilliant and wonderful poet. I mean, his poems are real killers. They're really just, these are not poems people share because they like him or they think doing so will help out their careers. These are poems people share with one another because they fucking break your heart. So I knew I wanted to talk to him, if only because he's written so many of the poems that I love most out of people writing today. He has two books, The Optimist and Accepting the Disaster, and he is also the poetry editor at Root Quarterly, which I only recently learned about, but it's a magazine dedicated to Philadelphia. Let me read the about page because it's a Philadelphia. Art and Ideas from Philadelphia is their slogan, and I think they're kind of I think they're styling themselves after like a lot of New York publications that are technically based in New York, but are really kind of aimed at a wider audience. So Josh edits the poetry in there, and I don't know what else is in there, but it could be something interesting. They have a stylish website, if nothing else, Root Quarterly. So I was supposed to talk to Josh today about an essay he recommended called Poetry and the Microphone by George Orwell. It's a really smart, fascinating essay that has a lot of application to podcasting. Today, we just never got around to it. So instead, we talk about a number of other things. This ends up being a fairly crunchy, nerdy poetry specific episode. I should clarify that we talk about Shane a couple times. Shane is Shane McCrae, and Maury, who is Maury Creech. At the very beginning, we are talking about Alyssa Gabbert and her piece on Auden recently in the New York Times. And then, because the audio was a little fuzzy at times, Joshua reads from a novel, an Orwell novel at one point called Keep the Aspidistra Flying, which he has very strongly recommended to me, and which I have bought and do plan to read, and probably will talk about on the show because it seems like a lot of fucking fun. So as I said, we talk about a number of things. I have a ton of extra tape from this conversation, and I we'll try to release a bonus later on that is just a bunch of other stuff we talked about that had nothing to do with poetry, including horror movies and what makes for a good one, which Josh is also very into. So this is Joshua Mehigan, author of Accepting the Disaster, and all around poetry weirdo, brilliant guy, and a lot of fun. A lot of fun to have a very meandering conversation with. Let's get to that right now. I mean, that my impression with where she's written elsewhere and touched on form is that she, like most poets and people writing criticism today, have a glancing knowledge of it, but don't have any feeling for it, don't have any ear for it.
A lot of like famous new formalists don't have any ear for it. So I'm serious. Like that's actually, I was like, what can I suggest talking about that is general enough so that I won't fuck myself completely. I thought that's a good thing to talk about, because I don't care if I alienate new formalists, and the ones that I alienate are my friends already. So and they also know. I have a couple of friends who kind of play. You could say it's loose. I think they wouldn't say it's loose. They would say something else, that they're that they observe the fact that modernism happened or something like that, and I don't. But I don't agree with that. But that might be what they think in their soul. Most people just do a shitty, what they think of as a more interesting version of it that's loose. And then some people do the two lockstep version where they've never heard of rhythmic modulation or something. Well, so I don't know, there are a few people, 5 or 6 people who seem to understand. Well, I don't mean to make a club that
I was thinking also that Maury's somebody who has gotten more formal as he's gone along.
That's true. His first book is almost not. I don't think there's anything in it that's real. Maybe there's one thing.
There's at least a sonnet that's sort of that is recognizably that, even if it's kind of loose. But yeah, I mean, he really like steadily becomes more and more, and even like as he writes more poems that are metrical, the meter seems to get a little tighter. The rhymes get less slant, which is unusual, just because it tends to go in the. I guess we're used to thinking of it going in the opposite direction.
Like the fudging rhymes. I mean, I don't mind off rhymes. I like off rhyme if it's done well, but it seems to me that most people are, again, it's just like, well, let's invoke it so that we can prove that we're too cool to do it or something like that. Anytime somebody rhymes, like, forgive me, forgive me if I say something offensive. Please. I think you maybe did this once. I probably have done this at least once or something, but as I get older, I start to not like it. But rhyming, actually, I think there are contexts where you can do it. Like Langston Hughes has some ballads where I think it's okay. I haven't said what it is yet. Is where like rhyming an S verb with a non-S, like walk.
I hate that. I can't stand that.
Okay. So you haven't done it. That's good.
If I've done it, it was not. I apologize for my past tense, but no, that drives me crazy. No. I can't stand it. What is the divide? Because I know, like certainly among like singers and rappers and people maybe who take from that and from spoken word, there's an affinity for assonant rhyme, and especially like assonant feminine rhyme. And then it seems like, is it just among sticks in the mud like us that it's consonant rhyme almost exclusively? That you would far rather substitute vowels than like add an S or add a slight imprecision to the consonant somewhere. Is that just a new formalist thing or what?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think like most people I can think of who think of themselves as writing metrical poems, if they rhyme, if they're unsavvy career-wise enough to rhyme, they tend not to really do the rhymes always. Sometimes people do, or so maybe it's your regular ornamental rhyme, but it's also. I remember once a very well-known poet who's now elderly, who used to teach at the 92nd Street Y. I took a class with this person, and she was talking about rhyme. One of my poems, that she was noticing the rhymes in it and talking about how much she loved them, and it was a piece of blank verse. So it sounds like a lie, but it's just true. I'm not a particularly I'm certainly not politically conservative, but I'm also not. I don't even think of myself as aesthetically. I know everybody else would, but the way that I got into this was really like contrarianism when I was 21 or something,
Yeah.
like, okay, what are these people doing in my MFA program? They don't seem to have any idea what a line is. I don't either. So let me look into the various ideas, of what a line is. And I did, and I started kind of trying to do it and just got maybe zealously or in a doctrinaire way, or maybe not briefly, maybe for a couple of years or something, sort of a zealot about, like meter cop type of thinking and, rhyme cop type of thinking. But eventually, I don't think you can stay that way and understand what versification is for. I don't think a lot of people do. I don't think people know what it is or what it's, this troubles me.
So, like, when I talk to Ryan about meter, I feel, I mean, talking to Shane about meter, like, I have so little in the way of equipment for discussing it. For me, it's almost always just a matter of ear. I mean, I count, I scan, I don't just do it all, I don't do it without counting in any way, but and I have a number of rules of thumb as you have to, as when you practice something like that, but I don't know that I could make any kind of coherent statement about meter. I certainly never feel, with a few little kind of cute exceptions where you have, you add or you drop a foot for one reason or another. But I don't feel ever like I'm able to join in conversations about making rhyme mimetic of meaning, which like Ryan's really big on, or not rhyme, I'm sorry, making meter mimetic of the denotation of the line. I mean, for me, it always just comes back to like, how does it sound? Does it need to slow down a little bit here? Does it need to get a little rougher here? Like my contribution to his work is almost always just fiddling with something that sounds a little funny, whereas he can provide like commentary and explanation.
To whatever extent he thinks meter or metrical variation is somehow denotative, it would be better for me to ask him, I guess, except that this is a podcast. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, like what?
He will use substitutions to reflect a rising or falling, that's happening descriptively in the poem. I mean, a little bit like what Pope does in what is it? Essay on
snake dragging its whatever.
I can't remember. Yeah, he'll sort of enact things like that in the line, which I always just feel it just always feels a little bit beyond me. He probably has a little bit less of an emphasis on the sort of the immediate experience of the reader, which is almost entirely how I think about poetry. He's a little more cerebral. He's certainly like way more scholarly than I am, but yeah, I mean, he I think comes to it from wanting to make something beautiful, wanting to make something that sounds good, wanting to make something that's exciting and interesting and memorable. Between the two of us, we're aware of a lot of differences, but from a distance, we probably look, more or less the same.
I feel like it's a good way to create indirect meaning or something like that. But yeah, I was worried that you were going to say something about like, well, this sounds like a galloping horse or something like that. But I wouldn't think Ryan would go there probably. But
yeah, I mean, it tends to be a little more sophisticated than that. But certainly there is an element of mimesis in at least in some cases, which I never, I feel that way about like classical music. When people describe classical music as enacting something that it's about, that always feels very bizarre to me. It doesn't, because I don't. If I want, it's sort of like honestly, like the old meaning of. I feel like concrete poetry now has a new meaning, but like poems that look like pictures. I feel like if I wanted to look at a picture, I'd look at a fucking painting. If I wanted to like hear sound effects, if I wanted to hear like a horse galloping, I'd listen to that. I'd watch a movie. If I want to hear music, I want to hear music. So that always feels a little bit strange to me. But I know they're just like there are so many books about meter that I know there's a lot more to talk about than I'm able to talk about. But I feel like
Those are terrible though. They're really terrible. Well, that's one thing. Okay, so as a way into a discussion, one thing that I totally disagreed with.
Please, yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm not wrong. If I am, then we're just in perfect agreement about everything. But no, there's the Fussell. I can't stand Fussell. I love Fussell, but not that book. That book I don't like. I like his World War I book. I like his book Class, which is funny.
I've heard that's great. Yeah.
It's very funny. It's probably not okay anymore, but it's like it's like, I mean, well, I don't know. Maybe people don't seem to care about Class that much. I don't know, but no. I don't know. It's glib in a way that nothing is
Right.
allowed to be clipped more, So
Yeah.
he was a very smart guy. I mean, I met him one time actually at the conference, the Pennsylvania conference, and he was very strange. And somebody asked him a question about prosody, and he said, I don't know. I stopped thinking about that years ago, or something like that, which is funny because it was a kind of a prosody oriented conference. But and he was being given an award for prosody.
Was that just he was just a like a polymath and he just sort of like picked up that topic and then put it back down again?
I guess I don't know, but if he was, I wouldn't. I think that his ear is terrible, or was terrible. I mean, the examples he gives and scans, it's like another universe. I mean, there's
Yeah,
some
yeah,
room
yeah.
for subjectivity, obviously, but
Right. No,
it's
I read it about 15 years ago, and it was really the first form textbook I read. So I think that's why I think of it, but I don't really have any like thoughtful, informed opinion of it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would think if I went back to it today, but yeah, it was like it helped me get in the door and start thinking about it.
I mean, it did the same. I think I tend to flip through things like that. I don't necessarily read them all the way through. Maybe a couple of them I have. And I also went back to school to try to get a PhD and thought, oh, this is what I'll write about. So I did. I wrote lots of papers, long papers that I couldn't. This will sound like humble bragging or something. It's not. Because it was caused me a lot of pain, real like psychic pain. Was trying to write something that was like a college paper
Oh
now,
God, yeah,
because
yeah,
it was just a nightmare, like writing a 50-page college paper or something like that. It was just like completely out of bounds.
yeah, yeah. Like
So
the MLA scholarly article kind of stuff.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's
But I was taking
miserable.
it too seriously, like I was writing for a real journal or something. Anyway, so I did lots of prosody stuff, and which was really popular. I'm not kidding, but stuff I ended up reading. I don't know. In my life, a bunch of these things. I read parts of them. Some Sainsbury, and actually, you were talking about the Ern Malley hoax. I think he's a very good. I agree with him. James Macaulay,
Oh,
the book first. Versification.
versification. Okay, okay,
The James
Macaulay. All
McCall, yeah,
right.
and that's good. It's very thin. It's like a good size to
Right.
not alienate somebody who doesn't know if they want to do it or not. So it's good to recommend to people.
Yeah.
And then there's all the funds and how you say a thing, which I think is like exhaustive and really good. I mean, it's like
Yeah. I've
really
heard a number of
everybody.
people have recommended that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book. The thing that I think people miss entirely is that there's a difference between meter and rhythm. 75 years ago, everybody knew what everybody else was talking about, including people who wrote mostly free verse, probably, were like they understood, like everybody was on the same page, so to speak, to use a terrible cliche, but in some way, they might have thought about it differently or talked about it differently, but, you could probably have a conversation with somebody who wrote a very different kind of poetry from you, and you would understand, you would each understand what the other meant just because you shared some kind of history or something,
Right.
and maybe some practice. But now it really doesn't work anymore. This stuff was not codified in any way that seems to stick with people. So you have everybody. I mean, you're saying like you haven't read enough to talk about it in an intelligent or an intelligible way or something. I don't think that's true. I think the more you read, the worse it is, because everybody disagrees about tiny little, things. And seem to be different theories about how to reckon a line of a verse or whatever. But people miss the fact that you can have a line that by definition, well, you have two heavy syllables next to each other. One of them's a beat, one's not,
Right.
because in other words, spondees and pyrrhics. Okay, so I'm sure you may not have an opinion about this, but I do. I think that there's no such thing in English as a spondee
Yeah.
or a pyrrhic, really.
Yeah. I mean,
Maybe.
I tend to say that. I mean, not that I go around scanning lines all that much anymore, but yeah, my ear says like there's something that's close enough to call it, but one of them is always dominant.
Yeah, I mean, like if there's a pause between them,
Right.
because your ear doesn't take much to throw your ear so that you can start over.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There are weird tricks like my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains. My heart aches, pause, and
Yeah.
a drowsy numbness pains, where you've got a second foot
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
trochee. Really, like reality, it's a second foot trochee, but it doesn't register that way.
Right.
It's
Right.
like a
Right.
trick
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something. There are other lines like that too. Just by definition, you can't have two accents next to each other unless there's some kind of pause, I think. I mean, maybe, there's an example I can think of where I feel like there is a true, at least no one can hear that much of a difference. Something like advised night in church going on some advised night. I always just assumed that he was probably thinking advised or something, but
Right.
I don't know why I would think that. But then I heard him say it and he doesn't. So on some advised night, see walking a dead one. And I think it does register as two beats, even though there's nothing between them, in a pause or another syllable. This is probably totally arid. Actually, I used to belong to a writers group, and everybody was pretty conversant with this stuff in some way, But one guy would get up and make a phone call every time meter came up. He'd like get up and go make a phone call or do something to get out of the conversation. So
People complain about MFAs as a for ruining writers or for creating. Really, it's just a pyramid scheme at this point. That doesn't really go anywhere now. But part of what's really disheartening, I think, about writing poetry as an adult is that setting aside that there's no money, there's no job, there's no prestige, there's no nothing. It's not even that you have all these people who have MFAs, you have all these people who've gone to school to study poetry, but they don't. It's not even like an education in poetry is anything. Like there could be no overlap. There could be like not even remotely any overlap across, half a dozen different schools. Like probably there's certain things you're going to hear like show don't tell or some of these cliches, but like there's not even going to be anything you could refer to. Like anybody who's gone to law school, there's going to be certain common experiences. There's going to be a certain set of shared understanding. This is first year, this is second year. These are the kinds of classes you have to take. This is the kind of stuff you have to know. You can operate in a courtroom together. With poetry, it's almost like it's all just a different. They could all just be degrees in different things.
Yeah,
you can't even really have a decent conversation about like anybody's poetry with most poets who you encounter who are self-described poets.
So you're talking about a basic level of education about poetry that's missing or something among poets?
Well, just like, I have some ideas about things that would be nice if you studied when you supposedly study poetry, but I would even like for it to be anything. Like, I would like for there to be anything that you had somewhat in common with other people who supposedly studied poetry, because it truly is, like, an MFA is a useless degree, but it also isn't anything. Like, it's not even like a degree in chess would be, I was just playing chess a minute, like a degree in chess would be useless, but it would be something. Like an MFA in poetry is, what is it? What does it amount to?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, it's just nothing. I mean, this morning I was talking to my therapist, same therapist I've been talking to for 24 years.
Right.
Yeah, it's a long time. It's a long time. I'm a fucked up person. So I was, talking to him this morning, and I was saying just the same thing. Like, what does it mean? What is an MFA? So when actually in 1992, 3, when I went to get an MFA, there was, people told me, like my professors told me, well, this is a terminal degree, you'll get a job, But that was, I still don't have a job. I'm still waiting for that. I mean, I had a job for a while, but it's gone now. I've had a couple of jobs. I don't know. I mean, it certainly is nothing practical,
No.
except as much as it's, maybe you have to have some proof that you are part of the club or something, and that's it. But
right, but I mean, but I guess that's what I mean. Like, it's not even like there's any club.
Doesn't mean anything.
Like, right, like having an MFA is like you have as much in common with other MFAs as like people who have been divorced have with each other. You're like, you went through a thing, and you're like, well, it was like, it was a relief. This part sucked. Took this long. It was expensive. But like, what did you come out of it with? Fuck if I know. Like, it has nothing to do with what he came out of it with.
Well, it's weird. The people that I went to graduate school with, or the first time when I went for an MFA, the people that I went for, there were, poets and there were fiction writers.
Yeah.
The poets, I don't know any of them anymore. The one of them I know still. Everybody else, no. And actually, when we get together, she and I don't really talk about poetry that much. Aside from that, the people that I talk to still are people from the fiction part of it,
Yeah.
most of the people, I don't even think most of the people who were in that program still write poems, or I don't know about it if they do. I mean, maybe they do, but I'm unaware of their books, if
Yeah.
they have books, or I think a lot of them were just, and this was Sarah Lawrence, so it was supposed to have some kind of, people seemed serious, like they seemed
Right.
smart and good, but they
Sure.
they also were, they thought there was something wrong with me for wanting to use meter, and I was just sort of getting into it
Yeah.
then. Everybody who wasn't into it seemed, in this program, a lot of those people really seem to be just not very rigorous in any way, like they seem to just be just, writing like it could have been emails, or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
think I'm not in fear of bothering anyone because nobody does it anymore. I don't think. Actually, there's
Right.
one person I can think of, Janet Kaplan, who
Okay.
does it still, and she's a worthy, smart, and a person. I haven't seen her in a long time. Not that the other people aren't worthy
Sure.
people,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
everybody I'm thinking of doesn't really write anymore. There's one person named Alice who I disappeared for a while, but I think maybe she writes again. I don't know.
Okay.
My friend, the person who I would call a friend, I met in that program, is I'm trying to think because I'm afraid that I'm excluding someone that who I think of as a
Sure.
friend, and I've forgotten I met them there. That's really possible. Like, I'm not thinking of it
Right.
that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah.
She doesn't really write metrical poetry, and nobody I met there did, I don't think. But
Yeah.
I should clarify something, which is that there are people who write metrical poetry and rhyming poetry who think that free verse is not legitimate or not real or something.
Right.
And I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
not one
Yeah.
of those people. I think maybe most free verse and most verse is not legitimate on some
Yeah.
level, but that's just statistically has to be true. I have to make myself clear, because people assume that
Oh, yeah. That
uh,
it's a.
I was on the radio one time and I had to clarify in the middle of the radio segment that was being recorded. The guy had read this poem of mine that I made out of headlines about September 11th. And he was sure that it meant that I was like a right wing person. And I had to like stop and say, no, I'm not I'm not politically conservative or whatever. It was KPFK, I think it was Pacifica, which is a very lefty
So was he taking you to
station in
task? Was he like?
California.
Was he indicting you? Was this like a?
I think he was trying to avoid doing that, but then he ended
Ah.
up sort of doing it when it became clear that he was assuming that. And I said,
Right.
no, that's not accurate. But I
Which
mean,
yeah,
almost
which
all
even just
poets
writing
like
in verse, even writing in meter can give people that impression that you're politically
people
conservative.
and people make reasonable arguments sometimes that there's a shade of, I mean, a lot of arguments for it I strike me as unreasonable. Almost everybody you go to college with is off limits or something, like they've known you when you were young, and
Right.
so they can't take you seriously, or my
Sure. Yeah.
friends,
It's like
um
family is the
so my
same way. Yeah.
right, exactly, my college friends are, like, the only interaction I've had with my college friends about my poems were like walking into a room and hearing one of them intone one of them in a completely mocking, horrible, or coming in one. I was working on a poem and it was in the typewriter, which tells you how long ago it was. And the friend had titled the poem, had typed a title onto the poem. It had no title before that, and it was Titty Titty Bang Bang. I was, not even annoyed then. I thought it was funny. It's like that's the only response I've had from my friends from college, is like making fun of it, basically.
Sure.
So
Yeah. But that's, I mean, that which you, I don't know. You need that. You need a little
yeah,
deflation from those who know
I
you and love you. Yeah.
poetry is horrible. I mean, it's, like, you really have to read the Orwell book, the Keeps the Aspidistra Flying.
Yeah.
Let me just read you something from it.
Please.
I'll
Yeah.
just read you a short passage, okay? This is from the main character is Gordon Comstock, who was a poet between the wars, and he works in a bookstore, and he's a socialist, and he has had a little bit of success. He's had a book. He's been working on a book too, called, I forget what it's called. It's so, like, it's got, you can tell from the title that it's not that good. It's something like London Pleasures or something like, yeah, London Pleasures. He's obviously smart and has read things and cares about poetry, and has like an intelligent kind of critique of the modern world and advertising and stuff. So it follows his composition of a poem in his head and on paper and so on. And it's sometimes, I really identify with this. On page 20 or something, he'll he'll be really excited about it and think it's pretty good. This is good. It's a lot that's really fits. It's good. And then 20 pages later, he absolutely hates it.
Yeah.
Thinks it's trivial, horrible garbage. And it's just really funny that I really get off on the negative parts, actually, which is probably not a good thing. But okay. The clock downstairs struck 11. As the first coldness of the sheets wore off, Gordon's mind went back to the poem he had begun that afternoon. He repeated in a whisper the single stanza that was finished. Sharply, the menacing wind sweeps over the bending poplars, newly bare, and the dark ribbons of the chimneys veer downward, flicked by whips of air. Torn posters flutter. The octosyllables flicked to and fro. Click, 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 click. The awful mechanical emptiness of it appalled him. It was like some futile little machine ticking over, rhyme to rhyme, click, 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 like the nodding of a clockwork doll. Poetry, the last futility. He lay awake, aware of his own futility, of his 30 years, of the blind alley into which he had led his life. That's just, that's like a pretty typical passage. Actually, if I have another book of poetry ever, I'm going to call it "The Nightingale Strikes Again." I think, which is after a book. It's a fictional book in a movie called Clooney Brown. I don't know if you know that movie,
I don't know, but no. Because you had some comment that was sort of cryptic in an earlier email where you said you would like make a bet that it would take you longer to come out. Like it was something about how long it would take you to come out with your next book of poetry.
Oh, yeah.
I know you said you've been doing a lot of like prose writing.
I have. Yeah.
Do you have apart from your the general anxiety and contempt? What are your feelings about your own poetry these days?
Well, I mean, I'm still writing poems. I'm just not sending them out, and I don't have that many. And I don't. The ones that I have, I mean, actually, that's not true. I have a bunch, and I have like probably 2/3 of a manuscript or something. But I'm not sure about it. Things have changed so much in poetry since my book came out, like since almost precisely when my book came out,
right.
I'm not sure how to respond to the changes that have happened. And I feel like the poems, I feel like there is a response in the poems that I've written, but I just feel weird about it. Like I feel like I don't mean to suggest in any way that I'm like that there's anything kind of critical in my poems about what's going on in poetry. Not at all. But I just feel like you can't just keep doing what you have done.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think about that a lot.
I kind of have done. I think you even said something like this in the review of Maury's book.
Yeah.
You mentioned
he evolves or changes in these interesting ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to write sort of deadpan, or I think of them that way. Maybe other people just think them as flat. I don't know, but I tend to, I tend to write fairly things that seem lucid, at least on a first read or something. Yeah. And so I think probably a lot of people look at them and think, oh, this is like Norman Rockwell or something, or they see the end rhymes and they don't bother with the rest,
Yeah.
Hopefully they're layered in some way, but I mean, there's also, they don't look obscure in the way that people expect poetry to be or something like that. So
it's I know just from having looked that you're not sending things out.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I am actually getting ready to send stuff out for the first time. Actually, Shane took a poem of mine. It'll probably be like a year or something before it's out. But yeah, it's a weird poem. Probably
for Image?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's he correctly inferred that I am not a Christian or not a religious person, that I'm everything is dead philosophical material type of person. And he got that. So that made me happy. But we were talking by email because I asked him for a poem actually, because I edit poetry for a magazine. It's open, but it's also a weird situation.
Sure. Yeah.
One poem issue or something. But and there's a theme usually. So it's like I saw a poem of his that matched the theme, which is perfect. It was a poem that he sent out on. I'm sorry, I'm Mr. Circumstantiality, so I apologize. I will just talk about whatever comes into my head next. But let me go back. He took this poem, and it's a kind of poem that people will. If one of the 4 people who likes my poems reads it, they won't like my poems anymore. But that's okay. It's like it's a piece of blank verse, and it's starts with painting. So it's the culture, you know, cult with a K, you know. It's so it's maybe it's I don't know. I was happy about it. It was the first thing I'd written in like 4 years or something when I wrote it.
Good.
I wrote it standing in front of a fresco, you know, on my phone, which is the only time I ever did anything like that.
I'm not images. Is that all online, or is that in
Uh,
print as well, or?
it's I think it's both.
Okay. I'm just wondering,
And
like, if it'll be like easy
oh
to
oh,
refer
I
to the
don't
picture. Yeah.
so I
Okay.
don't think so, and I don't really necessarily want. I appended something to the end of it that said where this fresco is because I thought that that seemed like it seemed weird not to do that because it's a
Sure.
kind of obscure poem otherwise. But I
Right.
also don't really necessarily care if people know this painting or know the fresco. It's a
Right.
Bronzino fresco in this is like a friend of mine, George Green, who's another poet who I think is really great. If you don't know his
Yeah.
stuff, you
I
should
do.
read his
Yeah. I
stuff.
do. I do know. Yeah.
Uh, um, he talks about like Fulbright poems or like seashell poems too. It's a similar genre, but like you've been to the beach for a week or something, so you write about seashells. And Fulbright poems. Similarly, I was not on a Fulbright scholarship, so it doesn't count technically, at least. But poems about my trip to Italy or something
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
can be pretty tiresome. But it was it just happened, so I
Sure.
don't expect to write a whole volume of poems, ekphrastic poems, which is I'm so sick of people talking about ekphrastic poetry.
It is.
Anyway,
It's a low hit rate as a subgenre. I will say.
yeah, right.
Ekphrastic poems are. Yeah. There's some
Not
great. I mean, some
anymore.
of my favorites are ekphrastic poems, but they're.
The Bruegel, the Musée des Beaux-Arts is
Oh yeah, that. I
great
mean, that, I
example.
think like that the Rilke's Torso and the Ode on a
Yeah,
Grecian
yeah,
Urn are like. I mean, that's
yeah,
three of my favorite poems. But and
yeah.
two of
That's
them
true.
two of them you don't need to have a reference to it. You don't with the Bruegel. It's nice to be able to see the Bruegel, but with the other two, it could be any.
There's another good poem. It's not one of my favorite poems, but I'm thinking of it might be the first poem I ever thought of in relation to the word ekphrastic. Like I learned the word ekphrastic from this poem. Was a poem, the Elizabeth Bishop poem. It's about the size of a old style postage
Oh
stamp. I can't
yeah, yeah,
remember what it is.
yeah.
But
She has a
it's a
because
good poem.
she has large bad painting, but then she also has poem. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
there's also something there's a genre of poem that is like it's like an ekphrastic poem, but it's a scene. Instead it's a real
Yeah,
scene.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But it's
yeah.
treated like an interpretive essay almost, or like
Right.
the description is ekphrastic almost, and that appeals to me a lot also. But
Yeah. Yeah,
anyway, so yeah.
no, I'm eager to see whatever you're doing whenever it's seeable. Because yeah,
Thanks.
and
I
that's
don't know.
the problem of like to changing and to trying new things without losing track of what it is that you can do as well. Like that's I'm eager to see how you wrestle with that because I have no idea how to wrestle with myself.
Well, I don't either. I mean, I much of the time. I mean, so when I've been writing poems for the past 8 years, it's a lot of the time I've spent working on poems has been fruitless, and I write
Yeah.
2/3 of a poem, and then I say, "Fuck this shit," and I put it away for maybe forever. I don't know. And a couple of things I'll come back to and like them, but it's just hard to write poems for me at the moment. And I always have like the word that everybody uses is fallow. Like always,
Sure.
I've had two books, but I mean, after both books, I didn't write anything for a couple of years. I don't know what it is. Part of it is actually like the most depressing thing about all of it is publicity. Having to do your own. I mean, actually, my current press is comparatively extremely good on that
Yeah.
front, but it's like it's just you still spend for instance, my entire summer like addressing books to comp lists and stuff.
I'm just hoping that my publisher gets the book out before I start having readings next month.
I look forward to reading it. I actually
Yeah, thanks.
at least several poems of yours that I like a lot are not from the book that's out,
It's
because I
been
have
well,
that.
but you're kind of my model for like the like 9 or 10 year.
Don't do that. No, that's a bad idea.
I just like I don't yeah I like having enough time between books to be able to like let go of a bunch of poems. I feel like if I tried to put out a book 4 years later or 5 years later, I would still be excited about some bad poems, and I wouldn't have had
Yeah,
time to
yeah.
cool on them and like oh, let's let those die.
Well, I
So yeah.
try to do something like that, but I also I'm just slow. actually for the past, okay, this is how I work. For the past 8 years, 6.5, 7 years, something like that, I've been writing this prose thing. It's extremely long. I haven't felt comfortable enough to send any of it out, but some of it I could just publish as poems, maybe. I mean,
Right.
I don't know
Right.
if
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
if it just falls apart and I can't deal with it or something. That's been the plan, but I think it's gone too far for me to just give up at this point. But it's like it's really like doing an entirely different thing,
Oh
except that
yeah.
my way of approaching it is to write it as though it were a sonnet, which is really stupid. That is, it's untenable. Like, in other words, I spend 100 hours on three
Yeah.
sentences or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
That was
So it's like,
Warren did that with the whole first section of the All the King's Men. I think was written as blank
oh
verse. Like
really?
he wrote it as a blank verse, like
Oh no,
speech.
I don't mean that I'm writing it as verse. I mean that I'm
No,
writing it as though it's, yeah, I'm just writing with
right,
the
like
same
with that
amount of,
kind of yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That almost certainly it's foolish, but maybe the result. All of this is foolish, but the result might be wonderful. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm.
Listening to one of your podcasts, I guess it was the last one, yesterday, you mentioned Eliot, his essay, Minor Poets
Oh
on
yeah,
Minor
yeah,
Poets.
yeah. What is minor poetry? Or yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I thought, okay, well, I haven't read that. So I went and got it and I read it today. And I thought, oh, what a minor poet is me and everyone alive. That's what I thought. Me and everybody alive, according to, to
yeah.
this essay. And it's not that I disagree even necessarily.
Right. No. Yeah.
It's like,
That. Yeah.
you
That.
can't judge. That's his thing, is you can't judge, but it's like, I mean, you can't judge your contemporaries, but I feel like I could, I feel like I could judge my contemporaries. I feel like you could judge everybody. If Shakespeare and Milton are the only, like the only
Right.
very great
Yeah.
poets,
Yeah. You.
it's hard to imagine that anybody, like, oh, I certainly am. I am perfectly happy to be a minor poet if I can just write a couple of things that people think are good. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
happy to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that. And
That
he
to me,
mentioned
that's the
what I
distinction
love.
between like there are only a handful of poets who are indispensable, but the goal is if not that, the goal is to be irreplaceable. You haven't necessarily made like one of the great works that everybody needs to read no matter what, but you've made something that nobody else has made and that has value in its own. My question then, because at some point I do want to maybe do an episode on that essay, is like there needs to be, if major poet is that restrictive, and it makes some sense to me to say like, well, there's like Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, and like let's make it a small shelf. In Dante and the Underworld, it's like a circle of like six guys, like
Yeah, yeah,
that's it. And it's like if
yeah,
that's major poet and minor poet is but almost any other poet you can think of that you admire, there needs to be a sub minor poetry category, like because I
yeah.
think like it takes
Because
a
otherwise,
lot to
where are we?
right no like
Yeah.
like you have to
Where's
like
everybody
reach the
alive? Yeah.
level
Yeah.
of minor poet is an achievement, and I feel like that's
Yeah.
just to call everybody a minor poet, it feels like that in a way like that diminishes it. Like no, like a minor poet is like a notable poet who is not a major poet. There's something else
Right.
below
Right.
that. Yeah, poetaster or
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
poet or something amateur. Maybe that's what an amateur is. I don't know.
The thing I always say to, like, when I was teaching, I would say to my students, I would, like, if you look at how many poets are in the Norton Anthology of English Literature, or English poetry, it's like, what, I don't know, 100 or so. I don't know how many,
It's
but
a lot. Yeah.
not, it's a lot, but it's, not for the number of poets,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, like, there are 150 people published every week in, contemporary poetry, and they're all
Yeah.
supposed to be brilliant. That's what I used to work at Poets and Writers. I think that the thing that I understood working there was that, like, all you have to do is say a name, and there's supposed to be any name sounds like a poet's name. It's like a famous poet. There would be these lists of names as faculty at rinky-dink conferences or whatever,
Yeah.
and you're supposed to, just the fact that they're there and their name is there, even if you've never read a book of theirs, there's something about it that's like, everybody is, just by virtue of being in Poets and Writers magazine, is somehow supposed to be, that's elevated to some level. There's a similar phenomenon, which is that people will publish anywhere and talk about it like publishing there is a big deal.
Right.
Like,
right,
oh,
yeah.
I got published in, I told you this, my wife and I have this, like a joke journal, like Dancing Leprechaun press
Right.
or whatever that
Yeah.
we make up now. But people still talk about it and list it and post about it on social media as though it were an accomplishment. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't, the accomplishment part of it aside, who cares? It's also like, so good, I'm glad you got it published, but what does it mean if there's like no review process at all, and
Right.
there,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
14 people reading it? It's bad for them.
I mean, I feel honestly like I often feel that way about presses that do have a notable reputation. They feel like, well, in many cases, it doesn't necessarily recommend your poem that you got in there. Like, yeah, let alone Jim's Basement magazine, or But I got off Facebook because it felt like this all the time. And then when I ventured onto Twitter a little bit with the Slee Ricketts account, and it does feel like there's something like really sad to me about lots of good people and good poets with just sort of posting like I got accepted here, I got accepted there, and I understand it because it feels sort of there's such a futility with like sending things out and getting published, and then I got a contributor's copy of a thing today and I thought, oh, this is kind of nice. Like I have 2 copies on my bookshelf. Can't imagine where any other copy will go ever to anybody.
Yeah.
It might as well just be published for me.
Well, I should be clear. I don't. It's interesting to read that Eliot because he talks a lot about anthologies and also a little bit about magazines. And
Yeah.
like I'm not. I don't mean to. I'm not trying to piss on small magazines, which are completely indispensable in poetry land. But who else would publish poems if not for small magazines?
Yeah.
The New Yorker and the Atlantic and but that's nobody gets in the.
Does
It's
the
been
Atlantic
23
even do
years.
their like one poem anymore? Do they? I don't feel like
I
I've seen.
think so. Maybe
Okay.
maybe they don't. I don't know, but as far as I know, they do. I mean, I haven't been sending poems out.
I know they
but,
did for a while, but yeah.
I've never been in there. I was in. The first time I sent to the New Yorker, obviously should not have. The first 11 times I sent to the New Yorker, I should not. I didn't send to them all the time, but at a certain point, it's like it's just I forget which one it is, Gresham's Law, or so I can't remember which one it is, but there's just no way even to be noticed,
Right.
like unless you're already famous or something. And Alice Quinn used to say she didn't solicit, that it was all. I would see her on editors panels, and she would make it sound like she was just taking stuff off of the slush pile, but you have to know that that's not true.
No.
I'm sorry.
I respected Deborah Treisman for saying when asked that about how do you submit to because she is the fiction editor, and her when asked like, well, because they do take unsolicited submissions of stories at the New Yorker, and she's well, how do you pick those, and what is the criteria, and what are the criteria? And her response was, oh, have your agent send it. Like her response was basically like, the slush pile is a placebo slush pile. It is nothing. It is nobody reads it. It is not, nothing leaves that pile. It's just 3 months later, somebody will automatically send you a rejection. Like that's like, I appreciate that. I wish there were a little more candor among.
I wish too. I would certainly save everybody a lot of the time. I mean, I keep thinking that like, okay, it's been a long time since I've sent anything out because I was trying to learn how to write fiction or whatever, and then I realized, oh well, actually when I do send stuff out, it's going to be a year before I find out. I mean, there was actually the first poem I ever got accepted anywhere was at a magazine called Pequod, which was like a decent magazine.
Okay, I've heard of that. Yeah.
I don't know if it still exists, but it was accepted by the editor, like in a workshop I was in, like the first workshop I was ever in, actually. That sounds totally pompous. I don't mean it to. I'm just saying like, I really was not, that was a mistake. And I'm not even going to say what it's called because I don't want anybody to find it.
Right.
But it was in there or it was accepted. And I was very happy, of course. And I remember calling the guy who was the editor and him saying, well, you shouldn't worry so much about publication. And I was like, yeah, that's easy to say if you're not 20 years old or whatever. If you're not, I'm trying to, you can't talk to young people about this stuff. They don't listen. So, and I was one of those. And I was very excited about it. And it was like, I forgot about it. It was years and years. I thought that there was a mistake. I lost touch with the person, and it was before the internet, so I was like, okay, well, I guess I would go to Barnes and Noble and look at the issues, and it was never in there. It was years, and it must have been 5 or 6 years. A friend of mine called me up and said, "There's a poem by you in this magazine." I was like, "What?" So that was my first acceptance, not my first publication, because in the meantime I had something else taken. But then the Sewanee Review took a couple of poems after a year. It took them a year, and I queried, and they looked at them, I guess, and took a couple of poems. And then it was 6 years before they came out.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it was like the same thing for both of them. Yeah, it was a very, very long time. I mean, I'm happy to have been in there, but it was a very long time. And I guess there was a huge backlog or something of poems that they accepted at the time. So I think it was a weird situation. But
Eric Smith, who I know listens to this and was texting me this afternoon, this is just to let you know, Joshua Mehigan has a batch of unpublished poems. Solicit some poems from him, because he's got some.
You're serious? I thought you were kidding.
No, that's nice. Eric Smith is the poetry editor of the Sewanee Review, and
I know his name, but I didn't know that he was. I didn't know.
He's a friend. He used to live here, and he's a very patient, because I tease him sometimes on the show, but he's a very patient and loyal listener. But no, I mean, I'm letting him know because I know he's always looking for good poems. And people who listen to this podcast, I think you have a higher proportion than maybe among like poetry magazine readers who will be interested.
Well, I that's nice to think. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many, but it's not like some huge,
you may run out quicker than you think.
More Little Joe Gould than Emily Dickinson or something. Little Joe Gould. That there's actually a poem by Cummings about him. There was this guy, this kind of Lower East Side character that was kind of crazy, talked to himself, and always had like a stack of crumpled papers, and was always in bars scribbling. And they were all friendly with him or something. I'm probably getting it slightly wrong, but they were all friendly with him, and but he would never let anybody see his great work, his Ulysses or whatever. And then he died, and there was nothing. So that's what I'm saying. It's probably more like my situation, probably more like that than Emily Dickinson. That's all. But it's not nothing, but it's, it's not like some huge treasure trove of great poems or something.
That's somehow stranger and better than if it were like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, or just like something bad that was, because you'd expect it to be just sort of some kind of mess. But if it's literally nothing, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah. I think it was literally nothing. So who are your favorite poets? That's a ridiculous question, but on purpose.
I mean, there are the favorites, and then there are those I like. I don't read Hausman and Larkin for pleasure anymore because it's too close and it's too infectious, but clearly I love both of them a great deal. And weirdly, one of the collections of poetry I return to over and over again and always have mixed feelings about is the sonnets, the Shakespeare sonnets. I do spend a lot of time with those. I love Horace, whom I can't read really, but I love.
What's your favorite sonnet? Your favorite Shakespeare sonnet? It's a silly question on purpose.
Oh, 73. I mean, I think 1873 and 116 are for me maybe the best.
73 is that
time of year that makes to me behold.
That's great. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And 116, this is really.
Let me not to the marriage of true minds. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when alteration finds, or bends with a remover to remove, etc. Yeah.
I have it too. We had it at our wedding, and it was on our, which I know is cheesy, but whatever.
Right. It's Shakespeare. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, but it's like, it's really better than any wedding. You know what I mean? But I think it's a great. I think that's in the running for me too. That one is just phenomenal, especially within his bending sickles compass that line is just amazing. But then, not to say the obvious continually, and I also love When in Disgrace with Fortune in Men's Eyes. But I also think a lot of them are not that great, and somebody like Harold Bloom with voice. Like if you're looking for Shakespeare, people say there's no juvenilia, and he would say, look at Richard III, which is probably true in some way. Or
the plays are uneven. There's some, they're strong spots and weak spots, and the sonnets are very uneven.
Hackery in the sonnets.
Oh yeah, and you see him like reusing, not like he'll reuse pairs of rhymes and even like constructions, and you can see he's like. it's like he's laying down versions, and then sometimes he gets it just so, and then sometimes it's like a little like I actually think like I was talking to a guy last night about 30, because 29 I love, When in Disgrace with Fortune in Men's Eyes, and then 30 is very similar in that it's a list of woes followed by but then there's you. But in 30, which has a wonderful beginning, right, which is When Do the Sessions of Sweet Silent Thought, it ends in this really sort of dinky anticlimactic way that just feels like, well, that's not quite enough of a Volta. But you see it as like it's clearly paired with 29. And then of course like the first 15 is actually really lovely. The first however many are all sort of like versions of the same the same basic idea. That's part of why I love that collection, and I go back to it, is that you see a work in progress as well as seeing some of the greatest poems ever written.
And when I think Alice was in the Brooklyn Poets Sonnet class, and
oh yeah,
it was that was a really good class. It was fun, but one of the things that I always say to these classes that like the couplets are, if you try to memorize, especially those, think about those sonnets, like when I brush up on one of the first 10 sonnets or whatever the breeds, often I will say the wrong couplet because they're kind of interchangeable.
Or I'll sometimes I'll even do like the it's not properly an octave and a sestet, but I'll like the first chunk, the first 8 lines and the last 6 lines, I'll do like the first 8 lines from one poem and then 4 because for a while I tried to memorize them. I got to 30, but like if I when I wasn't totally on my game, they would all just smear together into a waterfall.
Right.
I mean,
I did the first 10, I try to do programmatically, like I was going to keep going. I stopped after 10 because I realized that would be a nightmare. But do you know Joey Franz? Is that his last name? Franz? He went to Johns Hopkins, the MFA program. He seemed like a truly brilliant guy. He memorized the whole thing. I think he may have not kept it up, but he memorized the whole thing. That's admirable. I guess, I mean, it's, if you can do that and it's not a problem for you, but I think he has lots of other stuff memorized.
I think because so many of them are so similar, and because there are a bunch that are not great, I think I think like Aaron Pachigian probably had it better, which was he just did all of Keats's odes.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
There are fewer duds in that, but again, like that's part of what makes Shakespeare what he is. The Johnson line about the 2 kids in the bar saying, I heard he never struck a line, and Johnson said, would that he had struck 1,000, or but that's part of what's great about him, is that he's brave or bored or impatient enough just to keep going, and so he leaves in a bunch of dross sometimes, but then he gets to the next thing, and it's amazing. And whereas my tendency is always to like go back and torture myself over the first 2 lines that sucked.
Oh, you're not so much with the plays, but obviously, but I mean, some of them are better and some are worse. But it's like
I think
there's genius in the worst plays. I think. I don't know.
Oh no, well no, that's like there is genius, and like I read Antony and Cleopatra a few years ago for the first time, and it feels like, I mean, they are amazing, but they're like, there's so many plays that are amazing, but like that's an example of one that feels like it has like 2 concepts of a play in there, and if you had sort of picked a tone for it's never a waste of time. There's never nothing there. There's almost always something amazing there, but often it doesn't quite all hold together, or the little coincidences and the little symmetries feel chintzy instead of feeling well-timed and poignant, or like in Hamlet, you can kind of like laugh off and get into the spirit and just sort of blow through the whole pirate ship thing, which is ridiculous. But then in other plays, it feels like, what is all this contrivance? What are we doing here?
Which is your favorite one? I mean, I know
the
that's
plays
a
Hamlet.
Question.
It's very boring. I have very boring taste. Hamlet. Yeah, I love it.
That's pretty great.
I've done it a couple times, and I've read it a bunch of times, and I taught it, and it just, I mean, I love it. It's one of the most perfect plots. There's some weirdness in the plot, but the triple symmetry of sons avenging fathers is so beautifully built that it's.
What did you play in it? Were you Hamlet?
I was Hamlet as like a 15-year-old. Yeah,
Uh,
and then something else and some other production. Yeah. I
that's
mean,
insane.
it wasn't. I mean, it was it was like we trimmed it down some because it was teenagers and it was not good. But I did a bunch of I acting and theater's the other part of my life. Yeah,
What
I want to go back and just spend more time with him because it's been a little while since I need to stop reading other stuff and only read him for a while. But yeah, sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, I feel the same way. I haven't read play in a while. Actually, I just read well, I just saw King Lear. I saw King Lear with David Yessie in it. The
Oh, which
one in yeah,
I
yeah,
heard about. I heard that was very good.
like it's like an insane thing to do, I think, if you have any other kind of life, but
Right.
it's yeah, that's my favorite play. That is like
Oh yeah.
it's just it's like the thing another thing Elliot is in my head. There are particular things in it that are just direct hits, just like
Yeah. Yeah.
wrath
Yeah. Yeah.
and vanity are direct hits in my
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
life, my family, in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm sort of obsessed with everything in it, like every moment of that place, like an
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah. You do have a dark vision of the world. Like, you do,
Well,
yeah.
I also love the world, and I'm not suicidal. I'm not a nihilist. I really do. I mean, I love a lot of things. I have a friend. So I was complaining about Seamus Heaney, actually.
Yeah.
I was complaining about his diction, and I don't like something about his diction often. I have lots of respect for Seamus Heaney. I don't,
Yeah.
but a friend was like, "You don't like anything. You don't like anything." And I thought I'm going to make a list of the things I like, and I gave up because there are too many. I mean, I really do love
Yeah.
the tremendous amount of things in the world. I don't necessarily like the same things that other people do. I don't know. I have weird tastes, I guess. But
Or old fashioned taste, or like,
you say old fashioned. Now that to me is upsetting, but
okay.
a thought as a thought. No, no. There's a poet, Priscilla Becker, and I was, just like friendly with her. I think she's left the city, or this is a pandemic has fucked everything up. But I was talking with her at some point, and she used a term like that in my first book, and I was horrified. And then I looked at it and I was like, okay, I understand why she's saying this. Also, just rhyme seems old fashioned to everybody, but
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
mostly meter people can't hear unless it's like a tetrameter or two. I mean, people can't if there's rhyme, but if it's blank verse, a lot of people
Oh,
don't really.
it goes,
Know.
yeah,
Yeah.
it goes right over their heads. Yeah.
Yeah, George Green's whole
Hmm.
book is almost the whole book is blank verses. I think there's one rhyming poem in it, and he was afraid that people would, that people would be bothered by the meter. And I kept
No.
saying, I don't think so. I don't think anybody really, except for a lot of people. A lot of people who write metrical poetry will say, well, you don't hear it the whole time. Like if you're at a Shakespeare play, you don't hear it the whole time. And yeah, no, I do actually, and I don't think there's anything weird about that. I don't think
Yeah.
I don't I have dog ears or anything.
Oh,
I think
you
you just
hear
have
you
to.
hear like you hear like the beat in a song where you like often like my experience is that when it falls out, like when it drops.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
do. I also though get made fun of by formal people for writing or having too rigorous a meter. In my Ryan makes fun of me for that.
when I first started learning meter, and of course that's everybody has to do that now. It's not like you're raised in it.
No.
So everybody has to learn it. And I know that when I first started learning it, I know that many students I've had who were just learning it can't stop thinking about it. So they're emphasizing it inwardly the whole time they're reading. They're thinking, my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my senses. My senses, though it's a very I think it's a very particular experience that dates to now, maybe a very particular experience of meter. Maybe it was always the case, but I think if you're 13 and you have this stuff in your head, maybe that's when it happens. It's not when
Right.
you're 35. So everybody's learning this stuff at a late age, and maybe they can't see that they can't see that it's modulated. They don't drill themselves in the same way to the point where they can do it. They can do a loose version of it, and that's there's something to be said for that often. Like I think like what's the Auden thing with the epitaph on a tyrant
Oh
is
right. Yeah. Yeah.
loose.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's like a sensual 5 beat
Yeah.
line or whatever. I think that's some really great poems have been written in looser lines, or
Yeah. Yeah.
even lines with an ambiguous number of beats, or and that's a lot of Eliot is that. A friend of mine that I mentioned before, Michael Slip, who is really a brilliant guy and he translates mostly Hungarian poetry really amazingly, although he doesn't really try to publish it usually. And he does like exact verse, analogous verse. It's not. I forget exactly. I'm not an expert in Hungarian prosody, but I think they have iambic pentameter, or not iambic pentameter, but decasyllabic lines that maybe where beats are counted. I can't remember. I ought to know this. You'd probably be mad at me if you heard me say this. But so he'll translate a sonnet into and he'll translate I gather it's easier to rhyme probably in Hungarian, and he'll translate a Petrarchan sonnet into a Petrarchan sonnet in English, and it's good. It's very, very good, and it's shocking. Not that many people can do that. He was writing. He would bring some of his poems to a workshop, and a couple of people in this writers group. So it was not a workshop. It was a bunch of people with books out and so on. And people would say, "This is like Doggerel," and we were fascinated by the fact that people were using the words Doggerel to mean something that does scan and rhyme, because they're hearing it as Singsongy, which is the word I hear over and over again that makes me want to strangle myself. Chimey, Singsongy, chimey is what everybody says about rhyme. Well, that's just because you're not used to it or something.
So Doggerel,
which I understand
that it was
they
just meant that they didn't like it, but it was specifically like what triggered that term for them was that it was rhyming and it was in meter.
Yeah, and these are people who are highly educated and smart and good writers and understand how to write in meter. But it was just like, you're doing it too well, so it's Doggerel. But they just meant unserious verse or something. I mean, you can see the connection, but it's just a very strange value inversion,
That was my conversation with Joshua Mehigan. He is, again, the author of Accepting the Disaster and The Optimist. He edits poetry at Root Quarterly, and he is also, I should mention, on Twitter. I think his handle is just his name. Yeah, his handle is just at Joshua Mehigan, Mehigan. I know he hates Twitter with a fiery intensity, but he also spends a fair amount of time on there, so you may find him if you go looking. Thanks so much for listening. You can reach me, as always, at sleerickets@gmail.com or at sleerickets on Twitter, where I or one of the many people who handle that account will be glad to say something tart in reply to whatever it is you have on your mind. Oh, I do hope to see a couple of you at the Alan Shapiro reading and interview tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Flyleaf Books. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you all again very soon. Until then.